Okay, today we'll be talking about Odysseus's arrival in Ithaca, coming home. So this is the part of the Knossos poem that we've probably been expecting, and you'll notice that, a good chunk of the book, like nearly the latter half, is all about actually being in Ithaca, and it kind of takes a long time for him to come home, actually, even though he's arrived home. So here are my goals for today. So first we'll kind of set the scene. Arriving home at Ithaca doesn't really match our expectations, doesn't match Odysseus's expectations. We'll reconsider Odysseus himself. We'll talk about this man who is so amazing in the myth, but when we see him, he kind of is lying all the time. We'll talk about that. We'll reintroduce that concept of recognition that I talked about last time. We'll discuss recognition scenes because these books are filled with recognition scenes. We'll talk about the father-son recognition scene. We'll ask and kind of ponder when Penelope herself has a recognition scene with Odysseus. There's several candidates. When does she actually recognize him, her husband? And then we'll reconsider Odysseus again as this liar hero. Okay, so here's kind of setting the scene. He arrives home, doesn't recognize it. So this is just to kind of catch us up. The Phaeacians have helped Odysseus get home. They've given him a ship and given him a lot of gifts and dropped him off on Ithaca with all of his presents. So here he is. Meanwhile, Odysseus, who had been sleeping in his own native land of Ithaca, woke up but did not recognize the place from which he had been absent for so long. Pallas Athena cast a mist upon it so she could tell him how things stood and make him unrecognizable to his own wife and family and neighbors, till he paid the suitors back for how they misbehaved. The friendly harbors and the winding paths and leafy trees were all quite unfamiliar to their king. He leapt up to his feet, and looking at his native land, he groaned and smacked his thighs and sobbed, "Where am I now? Are those who live here violent and cruel, or are they strangers, folks who fear the gods? Where can I carry all my treasure, and where can I go wandering? If only I had remained there in Phaeacia till I went on to some other mighty king who might have been my friend and helped me home. Where can I leave my things? Not here, for sure. They will be stolen. Those Phaeacian lords were not so trustworthy. They promised me that they would bring me home to Ithaca. They broke their word and brought me somewhere else. May Zeus, who helps the needy, make them pay. Zeus watches everyone and punishes the sinner. Let me count my treasure now." Okay, blah, blah, blah. He's sobbing in grief and homesickness. So you can see, he's very, he feels very betrayed, even though he's completely misapprehending the situation. He is home, he just doesn't recognize it. But he assumes that the Phaeacians have lied to him, they've set him up to get his gifts stolen from him, etc. Okay, so that's what's going on. He's on Ithaca but doesn't recognize it, and is really concerned that all of his things will be stolen because he doesn't trust the place he's landed on. And he doesn't trust the people who got him there. So he's completely alone and betrayed, right? All of a sudden, this shepherd appears, and it's Athena in disguise. Odysseus asks the shepherd where he is, and this is how the shepherd responds. "Stranger, you must be a foreigner from distant parts, or foolish, since you ask about this famous country. Many people know it, from those who live towards the east, under the rising sun, to those out west, in lands of gloomy dusk. This is rough country, not fit for grazing horses, and not spacious, but not infertile. Grain and wine abound here. The land is always wet with rain and dew. There are fine water holes, and it is good for raising goats and cattle. And the trees are varied. Foreigner, I think the name of Ithaca is even known in Troy. A land, they say, is far away from Greece." So the shepherd takes her time in actually saying where the foreigner is, but just note how ironic all of this is. Athena knows exactly where she is, but she's manipulating the reality of Odysseus by calling him a foreigner, even though she knows, and we know, that he's not a foreigner. He's not in a foreign land, he's at home. But from his changed perspective, having gone through all he's gone through, perhaps we're just being, invited to think of him as a foreigner now. He doesn't really know his home any longer. And this is a lovely tribute to Ithaca. Ithaca is a very small island and very rough, like the shepherd says, a rough country. It's not really an agricultural center. It's rocky, but it's not infertile. There's some great things about it. And Ithaca is famous, even as far away as Troy. So this is just very like a speech that's very like pregnant with meaning. Pregnant being kind of a metaphor there. Okay, so he's on Ithaca. Great. Okay. What is Odysseus' first instinct when he learns he's on Ithaca? He sort of celebrates internally, however, he lies immediately. So Odysseus, who had endured so much so long, was overjoyed to hear from her that he was in his own dear native land. His words took wing and flew, but he did not tell her the truth. He bit his story back. His mind was always full of clever schemes. So the shepherd is like, so stranger, who are you? He lies. Okay, so like back over here. So foreigner, I think the name of Ithaca is known as far away from Greece. He goes, yes, I've heard of Ithaca, although I come from distant Crete. Now I am here with all this wealth. I left an equal share of riches for my children back home. I am an exile. On the fields of Crete I killed Orsilochus, the speedy springer, son of Idomeneus, the king. And this goes on and on and on. He comes up with this like completely believable and very specific story. Odysseus is like very, very adept at lying. Because he can, his mind is full of clever schemes. He can kind of come up with a story at the drop of a hat and be believable. And notice that his story is very smart. Like, he's here with all this wealth, but he has an equal share back home. So he's basically saying, hey, don't steal my riches here. I might pay you more later, So anyway, very clever, very scheming. This is his first instinct. And so this kind of poses a bit of a question. If Odysseus is so skilled at lying that his words can take wings and fly with a lie, this sort of makes the whole story he told the Phaeacians a little bit suspect. Athena, on the other hand, she's pleased with what she hears. So I'll say more about the suspect stuff later. But so Athena's very pleased. At his words, Athena smiled into his eyes. So remember, she's dressed up like a shepherd right now. But here she reveals herself. So at his words, Athena smiled into his eyes. She took his hand and changed her body to a woman's, beautiful, tall, and skilled in all the arts. Her words were light as feathers. To outwit you and all your tricks, a person or a god would need to be an expert at deceit. You clever rascal, so duplicitous, so talented at lying. You love fiction and tricks so deeply you refuse to stop even in your own land. Yes, both of us are smart. No man can plan and talk like you, and I am known among the gods for insight and craftiness. You failed to recognize me. I am Athena, child of Zeus. I always stand near you and take care of you in all your hardships. I made sure that you were welcomed by the Phaeacians. I have come here now to weave a plan with you and hide the treasure which, thanks to me, they gave you to take home. I will reveal the challenges you face at home. This is your fate, and you must bear it bravely, not telling any man or woman that you have finished wandering and come back. Suffer in silence. Bear the brutal treatment. So here we kind of see the lovely relationship between Athena and Odysseus, a human and a goddess. They have a lot in common. They're clever, duplicitous. This means double dealing. They can say two things that are contradictory. They're talented at lying. They love fiction and tricks. And she's the god who's the foremost for insight and craftiness. So she is tricky too. She's the goddess of wartime strategy, of course, and wisdom. So, of course, they have a lot in common. And in fact, we kind of learn in her speech that that she claims responsibility for Odysseus' success. She says, I made sure you were welcomed by the Phaeacians. I'll help you hide the treasure, which, thanks to me, they gave you to take home. So this sort of is implying that that she's the reason why he was welcomed. Maybe it was her words in his mouth that helped him. So notice here, her words were light as feathers, and then in the previous slide, his words took wings and flew. So yeah, they have a connection, but it might be kind of more than a connection. Maybe she's like embodying him and speaking through him, like the Greeks believe this of their gods, that they can be inspired by a particular god, like a muse or the goddess of love, or here the goddess Athena, to act in their best interest or maybe worse interest. She gives him advice: suffer in silence, bear the brutal treatment. Sometimes Odysseus is not really good at this, but in other ways he is quite good at dressing up, being in disguise. So anyway, she warns him to kind of push down his ego, though, because I remember when he was with the Cyclops, he couldn't quite keep it to himself that it was he, Odysseus, who triumphed over the Cyclops by blinding him. So anyway, here we have this kind of lovely scene between them. I've had students in the past write about this scene for their papers, and they usually write really interesting insights and everything. So, okay, so this is what's going to happen. In fact, her ploy by dressing up like a shepherd so that Odysseus could be tested in a way, that's exactly what Odysseus is going to do too. He's going to dress in disguise and then test the people around him to see if they've been loyal to him. In fact, that's what it's said over here. Yeah. Athena cast a mist upon him so she could tell him how things stood and make him unrecognizable to his own wife and family and neighbors till he paid the suitors back for how they misbehaved. Okay, so we're going to be in disguise. Okay. However, given all this, given that Odysseus is a skilled liar and given that Athena has been helping him throughout this whole journey, we might reconsider a little bit about Odysseus' story from books 9 through 12. So, just a reminder, these are the various stories that everyone loves so much about Odysseus' journeys. Let's reconsider this timeline. So, apparently, this is what Odysseus has been doing for 10 years. The 10 years he's been away from his wife, trying to get home from Troy. So remember, Troy took 10 years, and then it was another 10 years for Odysseus to get home. And this is a lot of drama to go through. So this, if I just heard these stories, I would think, yeah, that probably took 10 years to get through all this. This is pretty insane. However, if you pay attention to some of the things Odysseus says in his journey, in his narration of his journey, things are a little suspect. So here, this is in book 7. He's describing being with Calypso, the goddess who wanted to marry him. Lovingly, Calypso cared for me, vowing to set me free from death and time forever, but she never swayed my heart. I stayed for 7 years. Whoa, 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 whoa. 7 years? Whoa, dude. That's a long time. 7 out of the 10 years were with Calypso, apparently. Later, this is when he's discussing being with Circe, the other goddess who wanted to make him immortal and marry him. Every day for a whole year, we feasted there, on Circe's island, on meat and sweet strong wine, but when the year was over, when months had waned and seasons turned, and each long day had passed its course, my loyal men called me and said, "Be guided by the gods, now it is time to think of our own country, if you are fated to survive and reach your high-roofed house and your forefathers' lands." My warrior soul agreed. So his men have to convince him to leave Circe's island. So 7 years, 1 year, 8 years in total he's been spending with these beautiful goddesses, having a pretty okay time, sleeping with them, feasting, etc. So apparently 8 years were with these women, and actually 2 years were with all this stuff. Interesting. So we're kind of in a position where perhaps we might not trust exactly everything Odysseus has said. There's the possibility that these stories were a ruse by Athena to help the Phaeacians feel sympathy for him and help him out. Of course, if he only really talked about the 7 years he spent with this beautiful goddess and then the 1 year he spent with this other beautiful goddess forever, they might not have been as amenable to helping him. So this kind of begs the question, can you really trust Odysseus? And the rest of these books in Ithaca ask us to think about trust generally. Here's my question for the slide. Can you trust a stranger? Odysseus has been warned by various people to appear to his people at home in disguise as a way to test if they are still loyal to him. And so he first tries this out with Eumaeus, his slave. It's not even his former slave. This is a servant. It's not really a servant. I mean, they're not employed, a slave to this household of Ithaca, Odysseus appears to him in disguise. The swineherd asks, "Friend, who brought you?" Oh no, I'm sorry. This is Odysseus speaking. So Odysseus and the swineherd is a name that designates a particular type of work that this slave does. He herds swine. So he's like a pig farmer. So sometimes they'll call him the swineherd. It's kind of like bartender, like you tend bar. It's one of those kind of words where the verb and the noun that the verb takes on are in the same word, so swineherd. Okay, so anyway, Odysseus in disguise to Eumaeus, his slave. "Friend, who bought you?" So the stranger is asking the slave how he was purchased to this land. The swineherd said, "His wife, Odysseus' wife and son, will not trust travelers who claim to bring them news. Tramps always lie to get a meal. They have no cause to tell the truth. All those who pass through Ithaca go to my mistress, spinning foolish tales. She welcomes them and questions them, while tears stream from her eyes, and rightly so. A wife should mourn for her dead husband. Sir, you also would weave tall tales if you got clothes for it." To this question, like, who bought you, the swineherd doesn't really answer that. He just says that most people will lie in order to get good things from their lives. You would weave tall tales if you got clothes for it. This is very, very true. This is one of the kind of consequences of Xenia as a value in this world. They are so kind to strangers as a way to make allies, but a stranger might lie to you, in order to gain the material goods that you're offering. So how do you know the truth of who a person is when they appear to you like this? And so the swineherd reveals himself to be actually pretty crafty too. Tramps lie to get a meal. He's talking to Odysseus, who's dressed as a tramp, who is trying to get a meal. Pretty funny. Okay, so this is thematized throughout these books. Later, after Odysseus tells the slave a tale that was really entertaining, Eumaeus, you replied, so this is the poet speaking, Eumaeus, the slave, replied, "That was a splendid tale, old man. It worked. You will get all the clothes and things a poor old beggar needs, at least for now." So a good story earns you a good tale, or earns you a good meal, and that kind of thing. So, little transaction here. So one interesting thing about this is, even though this interchange illustrates the fact that you can't really trust a stranger, in fact, we know that Odysseus is lying in this interchange. However, even though you can't really trust a stranger, even though Odysseus is lying, this is a really pleasant story, and it works. So there might be something going on here that Homer is inviting us to think about, that, like, lying might be kind of a good thing. Okay, so after all, I'm thinking back to Athena. Athena's clever, strategic, wartime strategy kind of stuff. Sometimes lying is the best means to get what you want and to make other people get what they want too. Eumaeus doesn't seem upset that he's been lied to here. He doesn't even know it. It's fine. It seems good in a way. Okay, so this kind of gets to that idea about recognition, that there might be different levels of knowing things. So just to remind you from last time, recognition is this important concept in a lot of literary works where there's this sort of mental process of identifying something that has been known before. So this is the sort of straight-up definition from the Oxford English Dictionary. It comes from these Latin words that mean to know back or to know again. So it's knowing or understanding something that you have already known, in a sense. And so there's this kind of levels of knowing. And it's really important in literary history, these kind of recognition scenes, these scenes in literary works where levels of knowledge are played with. So as readers, we come through other characters to know things in a different way than we have known them before. Or, maybe just within the characters' cognition themselves, that they come to know something that, hadn't been known before, going from ignorance to knowledge. So Aristotle talks about this. Aristotle is our first kind of literary theorist, so this is why a lot of humanities courses talk about him a lot because he's the first to theorize how literature and art work and why they work. So anyway, recognition scenes in literature are they're very common. It's like when two characters finally get together and then we as readers get to witness them come to knowledge that they didn't have before. So get ready for some really lovely recognition scenes. So what's interesting in the latter books of the Odyssey are these kind of recognition scene moments when Odysseus is recognized by the people in his life. It's kind of interesting to track who is able to recognize him and who is not able to. So Athena, of course, recognizes him immediately. He doesn't recognize her. She's a goddess, of course she would recognize him. But she disguises herself so that she manipulates his ability to recognize her. But what's interesting is she appears to him as a goddess. Usually gods and goddesses don't really appear to humans in their true divine form. So it's kind of remarkable that Athena does to Odysseus. Remember, she doesn't appear as Athena to Telemachus. She appears as Mentis only. But she reveals herself to Odysseus. That's a special thing, revealing their special relationship. Okay, so Eumaeus, the loyal slave, he doesn't recognize Odysseus. Odysseus doesn't reveal himself to Eumaeus. Maybe he doesn't trust him or something. Telemachus. We'll talk about this scene in a second. When he comes to recognize his father, it's a strange scene because he's never really recognized him before in a literal way, but he has heard stories. Anyway, we'll talk about that. There's a lovely scene where this old dog Argos recognizes Odysseus. Here it is. When the dog, realized Odysseus was near, he wagged his tail. This is so sweet. And then later, unfortunately, the dog dies. So 20 years had passed since Argos saw Odysseus, and now he saw him for the final time. Then suddenly Black Death took hold on him. So this is kind of an interesting recognition scene where the dog, smells his old master, recognizes him, is happy, and it brings about his death. It's so sweet. His loyal dog. In fact, Argos is the first creature besides Athena to recognize Odysseus. Pretty interesting. Eurycleia, she's a really interesting character too. She's a female slave who has been in the family of Odysseus and his father for a long, long time. She raised Odysseus as a boy. This should be book 19, by the way. Eurycleia is bathing this stranger. So remember, they're like Xenia customs. They welcome strangers. They usually bathe them and feed them and before they ask them who they are. So Eurycleia says, many strangers have come here in trouble and distress, but I had never seen any man whose body, voice, and feet are so much like my master's. So this is pretty interesting. This woman who would be intimately acquainted with her master's body, if she's been bathing him and that kind of thing, and who raised him from a little boy. She would really know his body. She recognizes something in this stranger that reminds her of her master's body. When she finally recognizes him, it's this wonderful moment. This is one of the first truly narrated recognition scenes we get. Okay, so this is it, where she comes to a level of knowing that she didn't have before. So both joy and grief took hold of her. Her eyes were filled with tears. Her voice was choked. She touched his beard and said, "You are Odysseus, my darling child, my master. I did not know it was you until I touched you all around your leg." She recognizes him by the scar that he has on his leg. He was involved in a hunting accident in his youth, and so this is kind of like a symbol of Odysseus, the man. Often in recognition scenes there are little tokens like this, like scars or maybe like bits of clothing or something like that convey a particular message that characters have knowledge of. So anyway, this is hers. So anyway, you might think back in your own lives of, like, have you ever, like, recognized someone who, like a blast from the past or something like that? I happened to see one when I was in China last year. Everyone is wearing masks, because of the pandemic, but I saw in the basement of a mall these two young ladies. One recognized the other one before the other one recognized her. So she comes up and she said something, and then she, like, looked at her, and then the other, like, paused for a second. You could see her thinking, like, do I know this girl? And then all of a sudden it clicked, and then they both, like, yelled, and then they both hugged each other. It was so sweet. But that's a classic recognition scene where, like, your level of perception makes a connection to your memory, and you come to know something at that deeper level, just like Eurycleia does here, where her perception and her memory connect, and it's this overwhelming feeling, joy and grief took hold of her. This is amazing. This man she's loved since he was a little boy has come home. Okay, Penelope. Very interesting. There's clues that Homer sprinkles throughout about when she might recognize Odysseus, but it's kind of difficult to tell. Penelope is very opaque. She's hard to know herself. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this father-son recognition scene. So I put father and son reunited. So it doesn't really make sense to call them reunited, because did they ever really know each other? Remember, Telemachus has that great line, no one knows their own beginning. He doesn't really know his father yet. And so when they're reunited, it's quite interesting. And Homer is playing with that with us. He's sort of manipulating our expectations for this father-son reuniting scene. We really want it. We want it to be beautiful and meaningful. Homer knows that with his readers, and this is what he gives us instead. So this is in book 16. I really like this scene myself. So this is when Eumaeus, the swineherd, and Odysseus are in their hut talking. Telemachus comes to the hut. So similar to his father, he doesn't return home directly. He comes in a roundabout way to be safer, because he doesn't trust the suitors. So Odysseus is in the hut. Telemachus comes to the hut of the swineherd too. Odysseus hardly finished speaking when his son, his own dear son, was there inside the gate. Amazed, the swineherd jumped up, letting fall the cups in which he had been mixing wine. It spilled. He ran towards his master, kissed his face and shining eyes, and both his hands, and wept. Just as a father, when he sees his own dear son, his only son, his dear, most precious boy, returned from foreign lands after 10 years grieving for his loss, welcomes him. So the swineherd wrapped his arms around godlike Telemachus and kissed him, as if he were returning from the dead. This is a very interesting scene. We expect the true father and true son to be reunited, but we see instead a sort of father-son scene from the swineherd and Telemachus. So again, the swineherd is a slave of the family, and Telemachus is his master. And so it's kind of like this little scene sort of inverts hierarchies and stuff like this and expectations. And then Homer is being very clever here by employing a simile where he likens the swineherd greeting Telemachus as a father greeting his dear son who had been in foreign lands for 10 years and presumed dead. This is very interesting because, of course, Odysseus has been in foreign lands for 10 years and presumed dead. So it's all very ironic here. But anyway, this is such a pure display of emotion from the swineherd to Telemachus. Think about how you would feel as Odysseus witnessing this. Odysseus knew that it's his son returning or coming into the gate. Odysseus hardly finished speaking when his son, his own dear son, was there. Odysseus is like, that's my son. And yet, something holds him back from greeting him. And instead he sees the swineherd jump up and run towards his son Telemachus, kiss him, cry. All this beautiful scene. But Odysseus is there witnessing it. He's sort of seeing the fact that his son had a father figure take his place while he was gone. And so, this would be, for me, if I was Odysseus, this would be very hard to watch. I'd be like, wow, I really missed out. Here's my son who looks just like me and is a young man now. And here he's like engendering such love in the people around him, but I haven't had any relationship like that with him. So anyway. Okay, so this is the first part of the father-son recognition scene. It's like a surrogate father recognizes the surrogate son. Here's the real recognition scene between Odysseus and Telemachus. So Telemachus comes in and sees this stranger who looks kind of rough. He looks older and kind of poor and that sort of thing. Odysseus goes out to talk to Athena, goes out of the hut. Athena touched Odysseus using a golden wand and dressed him up in a clean cloak and tunic, and she made him taller and younger looking. He became tanned, his cheeks filled out, and on his chin the beard grew dark. And so her work was done, and off she flew. Odysseus went in. His son was startled and looked down, afraid in case it was a god. His words flew out. So Athena makes Odysseus more handsome and younger. This would be actually pretty scary if, like, this, homeless-looking man leaves the hut but then comes back changed, transformed into a better-looking version of himself. Wow. And so, of course, Telemachus is afraid. He thinks maybe this stranger was a god. His words flew out, so this is Telemachus speaking. Stranger, you look so different from before. Your clothes, your skin. I think you must be some god who has descended from the sky. Be kind to us, and we will sacrifice and give you golden treasures. Pity us. So he's really afraid. Long-suffering Odysseus replied, I am no god. Why would you think such things? I am your father, the same man you mourn. It is because of me these brutal men are hurting you so badly. I'm your dad. So he reveals himself as his father, as Telemachus' father, and then tries to kiss him. So this is Odysseus. Then Odysseus kissed his son and cried, tears pouring down his cheeks. He had been holding back till then. The boy did not yet trust it was really his father, and said, No, you are not Odysseus, my father. Some god must have cast a spell to cause me further pain. No mortal man could manage such a thing by his own wits, becoming old and young again, unless some god appeared and did it all with ease. You certainly were old just now, and wearing those dirty rags. Now you look like a god. So here, we might remark on the fact that Odysseus knows that Telemachus is his son since the moment he sees him. He maybe has been processing this, as he sees the swineherd greet Telemachus, as he's being made. He's been preparing himself to have this reveal, like, Luke, I am your father, kind of thing. The father always has more knowledge than the son will have, in these sorts of situations. Here we get to witness Telemachus having this kind of like cognitive trouble when he can't quite make it connect that the man in his mind as who his father is connect with this man in front of him who has transformed in this kind of magical seeming way. This is kind of scary and he can't quite accept it. Okay. So he's like, he doesn't believe it. Some god must have cast a spell to cause me further pain. Artful Odysseus said sharply, No, Telemachus, you should not be surprised to see your father. It is me. No other is on his way. I am Odysseus. I suffered terribly and was lost, but after 20 years I have come home. So this is a really interesting scene of recognition. Like, it happens at different levels, like I was saying, for the two men. Where the father has more knowledge than the son, of course he would. It's interesting, in my mind, that Telemachus speaks of pain here. No, you are not Odysseus, my father. Some god must have cast a spell to cause me further pain. So the man in front of him, this glorious, handsome man, who you would assume he'd want to be his father, he's beautiful, he seems almost godlike. He says, No, you're not my father. Some god is playing a trick on me to cause me pain. Telemachus is in pain here, seeing this man, hearing him say that he is his father. Why would this be painful? Maybe it's painful because he's being manipulated, he thinks. But also it might be painful to have your mind messed with in this way, I guess. Like, but I refer to this sort of like recognition thing. Like, he had one level of knowing his father. Now he's got a different level, but he might not exactly like it. Sometimes sometimes our imaginations are more magical than the reality is. In this case, Odysseus is really magical and everything, but still, to have a literal human being come in and say, I am your father, that will puncture all of the hopes and dreams and fears and everything that you would have in your mind, in your mind's imagination, for who your father is. So that might be going on here. And I say that because how Odysseus responds, he says, "You should not be surprised to see your father. It is me, no other is on his way. This is it. I am your father." You need to attach your imagination to the reality of me. Like, it's me. No other is on his way. This is all that it's going to be. You might be a little bit disappointed, but, this is it. This is what real life is, kind of, is the idea, potentially. You might have another interpretation of this scene, why is Telemachus in pain here? But it is interesting in my mind. They have this kind of awkward reconciliation and, introduction to each other. Okay, so this would be lovely to write about, of course, if you want. And then the question, when does Penelope recognize Odysseus? So we finally get the scene between father and son. It was kind of weird, kind of awkward. It's very weird between husband and wife as well. Remember, they have even more baggage than the father and son would, because he's been gone for 20 years. What would you feel like if you were, if your husband, if your partner in marriage, just you thought he was dead, or he or she, and then it's been 20 years. This is crazy. So anyway, here are some candidates for when Penelope might recognize Odysseus. Penelope, we see her in these latter books speak much more. She's been very quiet in the early books. She talks a lot more in these. So that even might reveal that she might suspect Odysseus has returned, but maybe not. So she's quoting Odysseus in this section. She says she's narrating like something from the past. This is kind of like a, what do you call that? Flashback kind of thing. Penelope says, so she's quoting Odysseus, "When our son's beard has grown, you must get married to any man you choose and leave your house. Those are my husband's words. The time has come. The night when I must marry is at hand. Terrible, I am cursed. Zeus took away my happiness, another bitter thought oppresses me. It is not right or proper to court a decent woman in this way, a rich man's wife, competing for her hand. They ought to bring fat sheep and cows to feed my family and give fine gifts, not eat what is not theirs and offer nothing back." So, the night when I must marry is at hand. This is kind of interesting. Why would she say this unless she might suspect Odysseus has returned? She's been waiting for 20 years to not get married. Why is tonight the night? It's a little strange. Then she also has this kind of line where she's like, actually the guests should be giving me gifts, not the other way around. And so Odysseus, hearing this, Odysseus, who had endured so much, was happy. She was secretly procuring presents and charming them with pretty words, while her mind moved elsewhere. So Odysseus at least sees Penelope being a little bit crafty and duplicitous in this speech. So maybe they have this kind of secret understanding of each other, potentially, but it's not explicitly stated. Homer's being sly. Penelope, again, has this moment that might seem like she recognizes Odysseus. She starts speaking to this stranger, that this is Odysseus in disguise, and she tells the story of the loom. We've heard this story before, but a suitor talked about it. This is what Penelope's famous for. It seems interesting to me that Penelope tells the story to the stranger. Why would she do this? Is she bragging? Or is she trying to convey some information to her husband that she's been loyal to him these many years? Sorry. Okay, so I won't read this whole thing, but she tells him the story, that at first she says how much she misses her husband. This seems smart, to tell your husband in disguise that you really missed him, sort of playing a game, and then to tell him, this is what I was doing to kind of buy time. And then she says that, I have no more ideas. I cannot fend off marriage any longer. Sorry, my cats are fighting. Hey, stop. Leave each other alone. Okay, cats. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so potentially it's here, maybe the secret messages, conveyed, through subterfuge in a way. This is an interesting moment. So Penelope asks the stranger who he is, and he starts talking about how he's from Crete again, so he's lying. But when he lies, she has this interesting response. His lies were like the truth, and as she listened, she began to weep. Her face was melting, like the snow that Zephyr scattered across the mountain peaks. Then Eurus thaws it, and as it melts, the rivers swell and flow again. So were her lovely cheeks dissolved with tears. She wept for her own husband, who was right next to her. Odysseus pitied his grieving wife inside his heart, but kept his eyes quite still, without a flicker, like horn or iron, and he hid his tears. With artifice, she cried a long time. She cried a long, long time, then spoke again. So this is a very interesting moment. So again, they're still pretending like they don't know who each other is, but something inside Penelope seems to recognize something inside this beggar. His lies were like the truth. And as she's listening to him speak these lies, she starts having this very emotional reaction. And it's likened in a simile to snow melting in springtime. So this is kind of a interesting and very beautiful in my mind simile about this woman starting to feel again, and when for 20 years she's been trying to like keep from feeling so sad. So she's weeping for her husband who is right next to her. So there's something that may be going on here with the ways in which emotions might reveal knowledge that our minds cognitively don't have. And Odysseus being kind of like maybe cold-hearted here. He hid his tears with artifice. So like maybe internally he's crying, but he's hiding it artfully. So anyway, this might be something to write about in your papers, you know, the way in which this husband and wife team are both, I don't know, they're both like crafty, they're both like going through it in this recognition scene potentially. Here's another scene that I love a lot. She goes, stranger, I would like to set a test to see if you did host my husband. Hey! Sorry. Stop it. Okay, so stranger, I would like to set a test to see if you did host my husband and the men that followed him in your own house, as you have said. Describe his clothes and what he looked like, and his men. So the stranger has claimed that he knows Odysseus. So she's like, okay, if that's true, describe him. So the beggar says, Kingly Odysseus wore a purple cloak of double-folded wool, held fastened by a golden brooch with double pins that was elaborately engraved. In its front paws, a dog held down a struggling dappled fawn. All those who saw it marveled how the dog could grip the fawn and how the fawn could kick its legs and try to get away, though both were made of gold. So this is another sort of scene. This is similar to Achilles' shield, like where a piece of art does more than art can do. Like this brooch is like a little piece of jewelry that holds cloaks together. This brooch has a dog and a fawn on it, and they're kicking and holding. It's kind of interesting and impossible. So the beggar is able to describe this piece of jewelry that Odysseus had and what he was wearing. These words increased Penelope's grief. She knew the signs that he had planted as evidence and sobbed. She wept profusely. Pausing, she said, I pitied you before, but now you are a guest and honored friend. I gave those clothes to him that you describe. I took them from the storeroom, folded them, and clasped that brooch for him, but I will never welcome him home. So she has another emotional reaction here, and it's because these were the clothes that Penelope picked out for Odysseus to wear when he leaves her to go to Troy. So this is like, you know, if you ever had something meaningful happen to you in the past, sometimes you even remember the clothing that people were wearing when that moment happened. And this is the case here, that she remembers, because it was so emotional for her. And so the beggar, who is Odysseus in disguise, is using that knowledge that they both have, but in this kind of different way, to suggest something. You know, maybe they both recognize each other here too. And then we have this very weird moment when Penelope asks the stranger, the beggar, to interpret her dream. She has this very weird dream. I'll probably end with this, the Penelope section with this part. So first of all, if anyone is asking you to interpret their dream, they are interested in you in a way beyond every day. You don't really talk to a stranger about, hey, I had this really weird dream, what do you think it means? You know, no. That's usually something about like friendship or maybe even romance. You know, dreams are very intimate. So Penelope asks this beggar to interpret her dream. That itself seems like she knows him more than you'd think. Okay, so she says, I dreamed that 20 geese came from the river to my house, and they were eating grain, and I was glad to see them. Then a huge eagle with a pointed beak swooped from the mountain, broke their necks, and killed them. I wept and wailed inside the dream. The women gathered round me, and I cried because the eagle killed my geese. Then he came back, and sitting on the jutting roof beam, spoke in human language to retrain my grief. Penelope, great queen, cheer up. This is no dream. It will come true. It is a vision. The geese are suitors. I was once an eagle, but now I am your husband. I have come back home to put a cruel end to them. Then I woke up, looked round, and saw the geese still eating grain beside the trough as they had done before. So a lot of critics have wondered what this dream is about, because it is quite strange. It's strange that Penelope is sad that the eagle kills her geese. She wept and wailed because the 20 geese were killed by this huge eagle. However, if, as the eagle says, that the eagle is her husband, the geese were suitors, this should be something that she wants. She should want the suitors to die. And yet, you know, something is kind of interesting going on here. So, like, what is really Penelope's angle in telling him this dream? What is Odysseus's angle in responding to it? So I'll let you guys talk about this. Maybe we can discuss it in class. So, given all this stuff about recognition and lying to each other, and lying even though it reveals the truth, let's reconsider Odysseus again. He is a liar, but maybe that's the point. So, we talked at the beginning of the Odyssey about how Odysseus is this polytropic man. Polytropic is this word that's hard to translate. In fact, we don't even translate it into English. We just use the word polytropic. It means many-sided. This many-sided man. He's a many-sided hero. He's skilled in all ways of contending. These are the ways that it was translated in various English editions. He has twists and turns. He's a complicated man. So how does a man who is so complex and many-sided, how does he go home? He wouldn't be able to go home in a simple way, like Nestor or like Agamemnon even. Maybe Odysseus is lying so much and trying on different versions of himself, different sides of himself, to rediscover or recognize himself, who he really is as Odysseus, and maybe to recognize what Ithaca is and what his wife is, what his son is. You know, he's got so many different sides to him. So perhaps lying might, in a way, be how he gets at the true kernel of himself. So that, you might not buy that, but like, let's think about that, I guess, a little bit. Okay, so homework for next time. We'll have a few more recognition scenes and a few more tests as we finish the Odyssey, so finish reading books 20 through 24.